Hi everyone. I have read your practicum logs and looked at your part two of your portfolio this morning and this afternoon and provided feedback in your rubric and within Typhon. For your practicum logs, things are looking great. You guys are doing a great job, which is good because you're getting ready to graduate. So I'm pleased that you have figured it out. One of the things I'm going to encourage you to do is make sure that you have printed off or have reviewed an electronic copy of your goals and objectives, your original or final approved set of goals and objectives. You want to be tracking your progress on those very closely as you move through 620. Part 3 of your portfolio, one of the artifacts that's required is for you to submit that goals and objectives with the completed dates of each goal and each objective listed on your log, or not your log, but your goals and objective form, and submit that as one of your artifacts. It is a required artifact. So as you move through your hours, especially before you get too far into the rest of your practicum hours, you want to make sure that you've addressed all your goals and objectives adequately and that you've met them. If you haven't, you need to be very strategic in addressing those with your preceptor in the clinical setting to make sure that you're making progress and that you don't get caught short at the end of the course and not make adequate progress to wrap up practicum. So just keep that in mind. Excuse me. The other thing to be mindful of is the inclusion of the NLN core competencies. As you move through the rest of this portfolio, the inclusion and the annotation of how it relates to the NLN core competencies remains a requirement. So remember, you're going to use the brackets and the appropriate number of the competency in brackets after you have written about something that's appropriately related. Make sure that if you did not do that in part 2, you need to go back in and do that, and then definitely move forward in part 3 as appropriate. Right now, you all should be making progress in collecting all of your research articles. I'm going to remind you to follow the blueprint that you set forth in part 1. If I use the parameters you have used, I use the keywords that you have used, and I use the filters for date, for language, for inclusion of types of study, I should be able to replicate your findings. Now, if there are 3,000 articles and you have filtered through, I may not necessarily pick the same ones that you would pick for the inclusion of your study, but I should find the same ones. It is so important that you follow the blueprint of part 1 that you have delineated in part 2 so that you have that's the systematic part of a literature review. Not just the analysis will be systematic, but also the research and the finding of those articles. Excuse me. As you can tell, I'm fighting a cold. My apologies. Okay, so part 2, up until this subsession, we used to have you do part 2 in 2 sections. One was a narrative in a Word document that was written about the findings that you found, and then the other part was the inclusion of the matrix. When I did your weekly welcome video, I had forgotten that I removed that Word piece of it. So you're not going to submit another Word document until you finish up part 3. So part 1 is the blueprint. Part 2 is just going to be the matrix. You're not going to submit the narrative component of your findings just yet. We move those into part 3. So when you look at the Prisma model, the steps 17 through 23 are going to be covered under your matrix. Now there is not a step for every single column in the matrix, but if you complete the matrix and all of the columns, you will accomplish steps 17, 18, 19, 20, and then 22. You'll note that step 21 and 23 are omitted. So use the matrix as your tool. Fill it out completely. You should find 20 to 25 articles from your successful search. Then you should find at least 15 articles that you're going to include in your final version that you'll talk about in part 3. Take very good notes about how you have gone about finding the articles, pulling the articles for discussion later. Right now, all I want you to do is focus on the matrix and how you're designing the matrix to be complete. One area or two areas that often students struggle with are the study design and then study methods or research methods. Study methods and research methods are the same thing. On your matrix, it's listed as research methods. So study design is the plan for how you're going to go about how a researcher goes about their study. This is going to include their sample methods, how they're going to collect data, their plans for the error analysis, what tools they may use, what types of surveys, the names of the surveys. It's the detailed of this is how I'm going to find my sample. It's the protocol. That's the study design, and it tends to be you don't have to put every single detail that the authors have put in their study design, but you need to give me a pretty good idea of the rigor of their design. Now, the first column in your matrix is the research methods or the study methods, and this is the approach to how they're going to gather their information. So the design is the overall approach to the entire study. The research method is specific to data collection. How are they going to get the information that they're looking for? The research method for your paper is a systematic literature review. Your authors may have used a quantitative or qualitative method. So their qualitative method may include descriptive surveys. They may use data banks or data mining. If they're going to do qualitative, they may use focus groups or interviews. So be very specific when you deal with your research methods to talk about how the data was collected, what methodology did they use, and be thinking of it being qualitative or quantitative and what types of descriptive studies, what type of methods that they use. So your research method is probably going to be a couple of words, whereas your study design column is going to have a lot more, maybe not a lot more detail, but much more detail. Excuse me. So just make sure you think through those. And there's lots of resources online if you don't feel like your research book or my explanation has been helpful. Just to remind you, when you go through your matrix, look at your level of evidence table. It looks like this. And it is I think it's the last page right before your rubric. Your level of evidence tells you which types of materials can be included in your integrative literature review. I'm going to remind you to exclude evidence 1A and B, and then level 7 evidence. I want you to read your levels of evidence table so that you understand why. I think I actually mentioned it in a video 2 ago. Just make sure that you're attentive. As you're gathering data and you're pulling your 25 articles, or 20 to 25 articles, make sure that you are omitting those gray materials as well as the other integrative literature reviews that have already been on your topic. So level 1 and level 7, you're going to exclude those. Your final submission for your assignment for your integrative literature part 2 is a matrix table. You do not have to do a narrative component yet. We'll talk more about that as you approach part 3. I think I have covered everything. If you have questions or concerns about your practicum log or your portfolio feedback, or as you prepare to tackle the matrix, holler at me. Please use the Ask the Professor link for generalized questions that are related to, those who, what, when, where, hows. What do I do with this? Anything specific to your grade, to your own experience, or something personal, always feel free to email me directly. Know that I'm here. Know that I'm praying for you. I know that you're probably getting really excited because you're so close. We are in week 5, which means you only have 4 weeks left. And so you are really in that period of time where the rubber is hitting the road. Do not be weary. You can do this. Just take a deep breath and keep walking. You are almost there. Know that you are not by yourself. If you have questions or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out. I know online learning can feel a little isolated and a little lonely, but again, you're not alone. So let me know how I can support you. Take care.